Hello, everyone. Good morning. All right. I have started recordings. Yeah. 208. Fine. Okay. The next thing what we are going to have a discussion is access specifiers. See, yesterday I told you that what does it means by a class, first of all, right? Just give me 5 minutes, 1 second. Yes. So yesterday we have discussed like what is a class. So I told you that whenever we need to combine certain different forms of data, but in a particular entity, you wanted to put all of different forms of things. It might be a variable, it might be something else, but we wanted them to be referred as a single unit. I have taken one example. For example, if I wanted to store the details of one student, one employee, now it might be having few of the fields like name of the student, name of the employee. For this, the data type is going to be string. It might also have a field called, let's say, decimal age. So age would having something a data type as integer. It might be having a field called fees or maybe salary, which is having a data type as currency. Internally, it's decimal. So basically, but all these different variables of or maybe different entities, what you are referring, they belongs to a single unit, and that unit is called as class. So class is basically is that template, is that container where we would put all those entities of which have something in common to them. We put them all into a single container so as to represent something, right? So as to represent something. Now, whenever we are defining a class, this is the syntax that requires to be get followed. So we have the first thing is access specifier, and then a class. Class is the keyword. Then user defined class name, customized class name. And it must always have this opening and a closing curly brackets. Now, I need to have a small discussion on without sharing and with sharing class. That's why yesterday, I told you that I'm going to have a discussion with this by tomorrow morning. See, before going to this, before going to what is the meaning of with sharing and without sharing, understand one thing. First of all, let's discuss what is the use of access specifiers. There are 4 different types of access specifiers: private, public, protected, and global. Private, public, protected, global. All right. Private, public, protected, global. Now let me try to draw a little diagram. All right. See, this is a whole organization. This is a whole organization. All right. This is a whole organization. This is the whole organization. Now, inside in this organization, there might be few users. There might be 4 to 5 developers. All right. All of them are working with their modules. All of them are working with their tasks. All of them are creating their own classes. Now, for example, There's one developer. There's one developer. Let's say developer number 1. Let's say dev1. All right. There's one developer, dev1. There's one developer, dev1. Now this dev1 is creating a class. This dev1 is creating a class. Or maybe he has already created a class. Yes, he already created a class. Now, when he created his class, the class what he have created is having an access specifier called as public. Public, and then class name, public class name, dev1 class. And then he have like, this is what is his classes, right? This is his classes. Now, similarly, there is one more developer. There's one more developer. There's one more developer. Let's say his name is dev2, right? His name is dev2. His name is dev2. Now, this developer number 2, he's also creating his class. All right. He's having his own module, and that's why he's also creating his class. Let's take lots of time to draw the diagram. So public class, maybe dev2. All right. So he's creating his, so he also have his class, right? He also have his class. These are the statements, some of the statements inside that. All right. Now there are two different classes. And there are two different classes, dev1 and dev2. The access specifier of both of them is public. Now, sometimes this access specifier, we also used to call this as a scope of a class. All right. Commonly, I mean, access specifier is the actual technical word for this. You can consider this one as a nickname. The second name, the alternative name, the acronym. So we used to call this as a scope of the class. What is the scope of the class? It's public. So when it is public class, when it is a public class, first of all, understand access specifier, then we are going to understand with sharing and without sharing. When it's a public class, when the access specifier is public, you can refer this class anywhere within this boundary. If this is your organization, for example, if this is your organization, my company, where the organization ID is 00D, it's always 00D, and then something like, and it's always, this, the organization IDs, they are always of 18 digit, and it's always start with 00D. It always starts with 00D. So this is my company. All right. This is an organization with the name called my company. Now, if any class is a public class, this class can be referred, this class can be used anywhere within this boundary. Now, what does it mean? It actually means, see, understand. Let's consider there are few of the methods inside this class. There's a method called math. All right, there's a method called math. Methods always look like to be like this. There's a method called as math. There's another method called as calc. There's another method called as calc. Now, this class also do have certain methods. It have a method called as div. It has a method called as div. And it has a method called as mul. All right. Now, I'll make certain changes over here. Let me do, instead of making this as a public, let me do one thing. I would be making this class I would be making this class as a private class. All right. Private class dev2. Private class dev2. So this class is private. Now let's understand. Now you have two classes. You have two classes, dev1 and dev2. The scope of dev1 is public, whereas the scope of dev2 is private. So these two methods, like you have math and calc, whatever, as a methods of dev1. Now these two methods, you can refer it. For example, you are having few more classes. This is a class. This is also a class. There are few more classes. There are few more classes. Now, if you want, you can refer this at this place. You can refer this anywhere. You can refer this anywhere, wherever you want. Wherever you want, you can refer them. You can use them. You can use them. You specifically would not require to define the whole functionality. If, for example, if whatever the functionality of math function would be, I wanted to have that functionality. So it's not required that inside in those classes, I would have to replicate that. I would have to regenerate. I would have to recreate. No, if you already know that there's a function, this functionality, this business requirement is already being there with this class. There's a method. I can use it everywhere. Why? Because that class is public. Moreover, this method has to be public. I mean, the method should also have to be public. Understand? This access specifiers, they are applied in two different places. They are applied inside class name, and they are also applied with the method name. We're going to talk on that. All right. First of all, understand the concept. So you can refer these methods if they are public, and the class is also public. You can refer them anywhere in the other classes, anywhere in the other places, but within the boundary. Within the boundary. Within the boundary. All right. Now, if I wanted to use div and this method mul, because the scope of the class is private, and let's consider for this div and mul, to them also I have defined the scope as private. If the method is private, if the class is private, you can only use this inside in this class. You cannot inherit them. You cannot migrate the functionality to anywhere other, to anywhere else place. You cannot ask inside this class. You cannot ask the functionality of div. Why? Because that's a private class, and these functions are private. Let's consider. So this is what does, first of all, means public and private. If it's a public, you can access anywhere. You can access it anywhere within the boundary. This is your boundary. You can access it anywhere. You can access it anywhere in the boundary. If it's a private class, the class itself becomes the boundary. If it's a private class, the functionality what you have created inside them, if it's a variable, for example, if there is a variable integer num3. Now this num3 I could use only inside this class. This function I could use only inside this class. This becomes the boundary. That becomes a local class. That becomes a private one, right? So basically, this is what is majorly a difference between private and public. All right. Let me now take this discussion a little ahead. There's one more class. There's a class having the access specifier as global. Global class Michael. Global class Michael. Now this class, being an access specifier as global, being a scope as global, you can even refer this out of the organization. Let's say there is one external system. There's one external class, generally APIs, application program interfaces. Generally APIs. I should place it over here. There is an external system. There's an external system, and you can expose the code which has been written over here to this external system also. You can send the parameters from this class to this external class, and you can receive the parameters as well from here to here. That could be done. वो एक अलग बात है, receive करने वाला दूसरा matter है. But at least, you know, if this, for example, if there is something over here, it wanted certain parameters, but those functionalities are there inside this class. Now, can this functionality, I mean, if there is a functionality, I wanted this to be get exposed to outer world. If there is a functionality which I wanted to get it exposed to the outer world, so that the applications, those who are beyond my organization, they could also use that, then we have to build up inside a global class. All right. So this is what does it means by public, private, and global, first of all. Now comes to protected. Protected class cannot be protected, first of all. The methods could be protected. These are the methods, all right? These are the methods. Methods could be protected. I'm not talking much about method because we are going to learn that in a separate topic. What is a method? How many different forms of methods are there? What does it mean by function? What does it mean by procedures and all? What is parameterized procedures, non-parameterized procedures? So we're going to discuss this all in detail. We are going to have this is a separate topic. But for now, understand. So class could have only three possible access specifiers: public, private, global. A class could have only three possible access specifiers. A class could be a public class, private class, and global. And this is the whole explanation of this, what happens when if a class is a public or private or global. So now let me talk more about this. The final point out of this discussion, for this discussion, is from this onward, every class, listen this guys very carefully. From this onward, every class which I am going to create, which you would going to create, would always be a public class. We are going to create public class. We are going to make every class as a public class. Point number one. Now, second, we are going to learn a different sort of programming called as test classes. Test class. What is a need of creating a test class, where it is required and everything, would be a separate discussion. I'm just asking you to remember the name. That's it. So every general class which I would be creating for your practice, every business logic which I would be implementing with a general class would always be a public, class. The test classes which I would be creating would always be private. A normal class cannot be a private class. A normal class cannot be a private class. Only the test classes should be private. So when we would going to learn the test class, the scope you are going to find as private. Test class could also be public. But in most of the cases, the test classes are kept as a private. All right. Later on, we are going to learn something called as APIs, Application Program Interface. And this would be during integrations. Right now, we are on to the second module of training. After admin, we have started with the development, right? Now, after development, we are going to move on with the third topic called integrations. So when we would be learning integrations, that time you would going to learn something like how we can create the APIs, application program interfaces. That time, the whole business logic, the classes which you would be going to create would be of global. The methods would be global. The classes would be global. Everything would be global. All right. Everything would be a global entity. So this is what is the plan of action. All right. This is what is the plan of action. You can take a screenshot if you want it. Otherwise, you can keep this in your mind. Now, this was one thing. Now let me talk about what does it mean by with sharing and without sharing. See, when you are creating a class, So giving with sharing, without sharing is something which is actually optional. It all depends whether you require this or not. We usually define access specifier, class name, class and class name, like public, class, my personal class. Now giving with sharing, before to that class name over here at this place, with oblique, without sharing. This depends whether you require this or not. All right, what does this means? Okay, there are two developers. There are two developers in this organization, Dev1 and Dev2. Now, if Dev1, for example, if Dev1 specifically wanted that the classes what he is creating should be accessible to him only, and nobody else should have the access. For example, due to certain reasons, Dev1 doesn't want that this class should get shared to anybody else. All right. If by any reasons he does not want that this class should get shared to anybody else, so what he's going to do, he would create a class like this, public without sharing class, my class. So this is how like he is going to create the class. This is how like he is going to create the class. Public without sharing. So if this class is without sharing class, he can access it anywhere. He can access, for example, if this program over here, if this program, right? If this program, there's one more class, which Dev1 is creating, he could access. Who's the creator of this class? Dev1. He can access because whatever for example, he can bring maths over here. Why? Because this class is also getting created from Dev1. Dev1 is the owner. So whatever is into his possession here, he can access it at any moment. He can access it anywhere, any place. Dev2 cannot access. Dev1 could access the functionality of this class. Like in this class, he could bring up maths. All right, he can bring up maths over here. Why? Because the owner of this class is Dev1. Also over here, the owner is Dev1. So he could bring it. But if Dev2 want, he cannot bring. Although, he can also bring, agar ye public hota, for example, he could also bring this over here. Lekin kaisa hai, कि if a user creates a class and make it without sharing, then he could, if it's a public, he could access it any place. But apart from him, the rest other cannot access that. If it's a without sharing. But if it is a with sharing class, let's say, with sharing, then Dev1 could access, even Dev2 could also access this class. This is what is with sharing and without sharing. Now, what happens if you won't define it? What happens? So by default, every class is always with sharing. Whatever the class you are creating, and you are not writing specifically with or without. So compiler would always consider this as with sharing. And with sharing is called as system mode. Without sharing is called as user mode. That is if user would kept it without sharing, this means this class would going to be accessible to him only within the organization, if it's public. So this is what is with sharing and without sharing. The without sharing is called as user mode, whereas with sharing is called as system mode. And this is the default one. If you won't define anything, it always goes with sharing. It always goes in system mode. So that was a small concept, but yet an important concept. All right. That was a small but an important concept. All right. So this was all about the access specifiers. Protected is only used with the methods. It cannot be used as the classes. We're going to see where. Now, how to create the class and all. I can do one thing would be like, I mean, in the notes, it's something like, there are a few of the examples just for defining the class and the methods, members of the classes. These are the few examples as well. I'm just taking you to the second topic. All right. Because this is ultimately is going to be covered over here as well. Now, let me take you to the second one is that is the object creation, but I would ask you to do all the assignments, whatever is being written. You go with all of them. Let me show you how, first of all, to create a class, create the object of the class. What is the significance of creating the object? And let's study this all. So now, for example, all right, let me take you to the Salesforce for this. So I have, let's go to the developer console. All right. Now see, like till now, what we were doing, we were going to execute anonymous window, right? And there we are doing the whole programmings and all. But now we'll not go to the execute anonymous window. Rather, I would show you something. So go to the file menu, click on the new, go with the Apex class. All right, go with the Apex class. Go to the file menu, go with new, and go with the Apex class. Now it would ask you to first of all give a name to the class. So let me give the name as, say, the product. There must not be a space in between, product info. So I'm creating a class with a name called product info. So this is how does it lands initially. Access specifier is public. It's always, you haven't mentioned anything, it would be with sharing always. All right. And then class and the class name, product info. Now let's consider that I wanted to store the detail of a product. The entity name is product. What is the name of entity? The entity name is product. Let's consider there is an entity called as product. In the business, there is something called as product. Now, what could be the entities? What could be the things inside this name of the product, price of the product, date of the manufacturing, something like that. Yeah, we can imagine what could be the details if I wanted to store the detail of a product. What could be the things inside that? All right. So let's consider that I have a product. I could have something like, product code. I could have something like product code. All right. So product code would be the one of the entity. Now let me give you this command. I would be asking you how you already have it, I think. Yeah. No. Okay. I would be asking you one thing, and you have to think and give me the answer. There is an entity called as product code. What is going to be the date? I wanted to define a variable over here. Product code. In my class, I wanted to define a variable called as product code. You tell me one thing. What could be the data type of that? All right, let me make it simple. First one, because it's the first one, I will make it simple. Integer product code. I'm making this variable product code as integer. Why? Because product code is always going to be a number. All right, product code is always going to be a number. And now one more thing. This is a class, and whatever you are defining inside a class, there might be two possibilities. There would only be two possibilities. First is a variable like product. If I would ask you what is a product code, you're going to say me it's a variable of the type integer. So if it is a variable, and in the coming days, we are also going to see something called as methods. All right, methods. Method would always, for example, if there's a method called as my method, this was always going to be end up like this. My method would always be going to be end up like this. So whenever you have this opening and a closing round bracket, it's a method. So though it's a method or it's a variable, whatever it is, if it's a method or if it's a variable, if it's a method, it's a variable. They are called as members of the classes. They are called as members of the classes. Members of the classes. Whatever you have defined inside this boundary, whatever you have defined inside this boundary, if it's a variable, like you just have defined a variable, or it's a method, you'll be also going to use that, right, in the upcoming days. So all of that which is defined inside the class, inside the scope of the class, this is called as, they are called as members of the classes. So every member must also have an access specifier. Like your class must have an access specifier. Class could have only 3 of them: public, private, global. Members must also, if product code is a variable, it must also have an access specifier. Now, in this case, when defining an access specifier for a member of a class, when defining here, I'm going to write, like I can write public. I can also write protected, private, global. Members could also be protected. Class cannot be protected, but members could be protected. Now, where to use the protected one? Let me now tell you this. Let me now tell you, because you have this idea. Or example, this is one of my class. This is one of my class. Inside in this class, all right, I have a class called as, let's say, public class C1. Public class C1. This is my class. Now, inside in this class, I have public my method. Public my method. Inside in the class, I have a method. Inside in the class, I have a method, right? Method also have this symbol. All right, let's not talk about that. Method also have this. Now see, I have a class. Inside a class, there's a method. So this method, I kept it as public. If it's public, it can be referred at any another place as well. If this is a class, if this is a class, if this is a class, you can refer, you can take this to over here as well. You can refer this to here as well. Why? Because it's public. Why? Because it's public. When the method is public method, you can access it anywhere. When this method is a private method, you can access it within this class, not beyond that. When this method is a global method, you can even access this out of the boundary, right? Out of your organization as well, if the method is. But for that case, if you are making a method as global, the class should also be global. That is the only thing. Whereas जब भी internal access की बात होती है, अगर क्लास पब्लिक है तो मेथड प्राइवेट भी चलेगा. क्लास पब्लिक होनी चाहिए. एक क्लास के अंदर अगर मेरे पास 10 मेथड्स हैं, 10 में से 2 पब्लिक हैं, 3 प्रोटेक्टेड हैं, 4 प्राइवेट हैं, चलता है. ठीक है. लेकिन अगर क्लास प्राइवेट है तो मेथड्स पब्लिक नहीं हो सकती. ये समझो. ये समझो आप. मतलब कैसा है कि ये एक बाउंड्री है. मेन यहाँ पे मेन बॉस कौन है? मेन बॉस है क्लास. क्लास का एक्सेस स्पेसिफायर क्या? पब्लिक है. ये बड़ा ओपन माइंडेड है. ये जो क्लास है ये बड़ी ओपन माइंडेड है. तो इसके बच्चे जो हैं ना, इसके बच्चे, इफ समवन वुड गो, बिकॉज उसका उसका सोचना जो है बड़ी सोच का है वो. तो इट्स अ ग्लोबल, इट्स अ पब्लिक. तो वो क्या बोलता है कि ये अपना मोहल्ला है, दिस इज आवर प्लेस. नाउ यू कैन प्ले इनसाइड होम. आप घर के अंदर भी खेल सकते हो. आप ये वाले पड़ोसी के साथ जाके भी खेल सकते हो और ये पड़ोसी के साथ जाके खेल सकते हो. वाई? बिकॉज इट्स पब्लिक. इसकी जो सोच है वो थोड़ी सी अच्छी है. अगर ये वाली क्लास प्राइवेट हो जाए तो इसका मतलब अब इस पे इसकी जो जो इसके अंदर जो मेथड्स है, जो इसके अंदर बच्चे हैं, उस पर एक रिस्ट्रिक्शन लग जाता है कि अगर क्लास प्राइवेट है तो मेथड पब्लिश नहीं हो सकती. मेथड वुड ऑल्सो हैव टू बी प्राइवेट. तो आपको खेलना है तो इसके अंदर ही खेलना पड़ेगा, इस बाउंड्री के अंदर. यू कैन नॉट गो बियॉन्ड दैट. ठीक है. अगर क्लास पब्लिक है जैसे कि अभी है, यहाँ पे 3 मेथड्स हैं, 2 पब्लिक है, 1 मेथड प्राइवेट है, तो वो 2 मेथड कहीं भी खेल सकती हैं. लेकिन जो प्राइवेट मेथड है दैट हैज टू बी प्ले इनसाइड ओनली दिस. लेकिन क्लास पब्लिक होना चाहिए. तो अगर क्लास पब्लिक है तो मेथड प्राइवेट पब्लिक दोनों हो सकती है और प्रोटेक्टेड भी हो सकती है. प्रोटेक्टेड पे मैं आ रहा हूं अभी. क्लास अगर पब्लिक है तो मेथड पब्लिक, मेथड प्राइवेट, मेथड प्रोटेक्टेड भी हो सकती है. लेकिन अगर क्लास प्राइवेट है, क्लास प्राइवेट है, तो मेथड पब्लिक नहीं हो सकती. मेथड पब्लिक नहीं हो सकती. ठीक है, थोड़ा समझो इस चीज को. चलो, ये हो गया लाइक अगर क्लास आपकी पब्लिक है. अभी एक दूसरी मेथड है. अभी मतलब इस क्लास से मैंने एक एक और क्लास बनाई विच इज कॉल्ड एज अ डिराइव्ड क्लास. ये पेरेंट क्लास है, ये वाला चाइल्ड क्लास है मेरा. बिकॉज इट इसका एग्जिस्टेंस डिपेंड्स ऑन द पेरेंट. जैसे आप मास्टर डिटेल रिलेशनशिप आपने पढ़ा है. इन द मास्टर डिटेल रिलेशनशिप देयर इज अ कंपल्सरी कैस्केड डिलीशन. the records belongs to the parent, right? If you would delete the parent record, automatically the associated child record would also getting deleted. So the existence of the child completely depends on the parent. The parent is very strong in this case. So if there is a class, in this case, what happens, technically, this is known as parent class, and this is known as child or derived, D-E-R-I-V-E-D, derived, या फिर it is sometime also known as child class. Okay. So this class is inherited. If this is a name, let's say this is name like public class C2. Now this C2 is not an individual class. Rather, this is derived from a parent, right? So whatever the functionality it contains have certain impression with its parent class. Now understand one thing. So if I would make a class, if I would make a method in the parent class, if I would make a method as protected method 2, all right. So inside this class 1, class C1, there is one method called as my method. Now, because the my method is having an access specifier as public, having a scope as public, it can be used anywhere. Because class is also public, method is also public. But inside in the same class, there is a method called as protected method 2. Now, this method 2 cannot be used in this class, and anywhere else. Protected can be used. This method can be used first of all in C1 because it belongs to C1. And it can also be used over here. This method can be used over here. So there are two places. First is this class where this method has been created. And second, to its derived class. So this is what does it means by a protected one. So any method, any variable, any member of a class. Listen this. Inside a class, you could define a variable like this. You could define the methods like this. So any method or any variable, all right. If you have defined it as a protected one, right now it's public, I could make it protected also. So any member could be a variable, member could also be the methods. Any variable, any member of a class, now it could be, the members could be either a variable or a methods. If it is defined as protected, it can be only used within this class. And if there is a derived class from this class, if this class is parent and there is a child class to that, then you can use it. All right. Nowhere else you can use. If you make it private, this member could be used inside this class only. All right. If you make it public, this can be used inside this and to other classes as well. And if you wanted to make it global, see, अभी तक कोई error आया क्या आपने को यहाँ पर? अगर मैं if I would not define this, तब भी कोई error नहीं है, ठीक है? अगर मैं access specifier नहीं दूं, if I would make it private, I'll try to save it. कोई error आया तुमको? कोई error आया? नहीं आया. All right. If I would make it protected, I'll try to save it. Control S कर रहा हूं मैं और कुछ नहीं कर रहा हूं. कोई error आया? नहीं आया. If I would make it public, कोई एरर आया? अभी फिर से सेव किया, कोई एरर आया? नहीं आया. If I would just remove it, access specifier, if I won't give it, I would just remove it and I'll try to save it. कोई एरर आया? नहीं आया. तो giving access specifier in case of defining a member is optional. If you won't give it, it becomes public. By the way, अगर मैंने यहाँ नहीं दिया तो public है. Let's see one thing. So if you would define it as a global, तब आपको देखो फटाक से एक एरर आ जाता है, दिस इज एन एरर। अच्छा वो देखना है तो आपको ये ऊपर लाओ, यहाँ पे जो प्रॉब्लम्स क्या बोल रहा है, डिफाइनिंग type for global field must be declared as global. If you are defining a member as global, the class should also be global. क्लास का एक्सेस स्पेसिफायर पब्लिक नहीं हो सकता, फिर क्लास का एक्सेस स्पेसिफायर पब्लिक नहीं हो सकता। क्लास ऑल्सो हैज टू बी ग्लोबल। अब जब मैं ग्लोबल करके सेव कर रहा हूं तो ये देखो यहाँ से एरर जा चुका है। हाँ, ग्लोबल क्लास के अंदर आप पब्लिक कर लो, चलता है, प्राइवेट कर लो, प्रोटेक्टेड कर लो, देखो अलाउड है। तो ये बेसिकली थोड़ा सा ना अपने को समझना है ये सब, और ये हो जाता है, डोंट वरी। सो पब्लिक क्लास, उसके अंदर एक मैं एक वेरिएबल डिफाइन कर रहा हूँ, इंटीजर प्रोडक्ट कोड, एंड लेट मी सी टू दिस कि और क्या क्या हो सकता है। एक प्रोडक्ट है, उसके बारे में अगर हम इंफॉर्मेशन स्टोर कर रहे हैं तो एक वेरिएबल है प्रोडक्ट कोड, फिर एक हो सकता है उसका प्रोडक्ट नेम, प्रोडक्ट नेम। ना यू टेल मी इसका डेटा टाइप क्या रहना चाहिए, पब्लिक, कम ऑन, नेम का डेटा टाइप क्या रहना चाहिए, यस, हम्म, नेम शुड बी व्हाट, string, absolutely right, string. I can also have like manufacturer name, that should also be the string. All right, so these are the two variables, and let's say public, I have manufacturing date, for example, manufactur, manufacturing date. What should be the data type of this? Yes, इसका data type क्या होना चाहिए बताओ?
Date.
Date, बिल्कुल सही, manufacturing date. And then let's say expiry date also. Expiry date. And then let's say public. हाँ, there's a variable called as unit price. Unit price अगर आप वहां डिफाइन करोगे तो उसका डेटा टाइप करेंसी रहेगा। यहाँ पे इसका डेटा टाइप क्या होना चाहिए बताइए? What should be the data type of unit price? If there is a variable called unit price, क्या डेटा टाइप होना चाहिए उसका?
Decimal or
Decimal, absolutely right. Whenever it's currency, decimal और long, दोनों में से कोई एक रहता है। Public, there's a variable called as in stock that would represent ki whether this product is in stock or not. What should be the data type? The answer is always going to true or false, yes or no. Stock.
Boolean.
Boolean. Boolean, absolutely right. So see, right now you just have understand like how we can define a class. I can create a class and define certain members of that. Tomorrow I would be opening the same class, right? I would be opening the same class. Where is the error? Public. There's a spelling mistake over here. Public. That's why there is an error. You see the symbol, this exclamation symbol indicates an error. If you wanted to see, just open up, go to the problem tab. It would going to give you the details of that errors. All right. Now you can save your code. You can save by going to file menu and save. Otherwise, you can use Control S from your keyboard. All right. So this class is now being saved. Tomorrow we'll open the same class and I would show you like how we can create the object. First of all, what is an object? What is the significance of an object? We're going to study this by tomorrow morning. All right, guys, that's all for today I have. You have anything to discuss? Any questions? Yeah, I have one more important announcement, but before that, you can proceed with your questions. Yes. Any questions? Any questions? Fine. Nothing to discuss. I have one important announcement.